Hi, everyone. I'm here today with Tyler Mills and roll the intro. Okay, so how's it going, Tyler?
Pretty good, Jason. How are you doing today?
Excellent, excellent. I'm glad to see you got your camera working there. I'm going to go cameraless for the interview, but everybody knows my ugly mug.
Right.
But so the reason I wanted to talk today, and we've kind of briefly talked on Messenger and, of course, numerous times over the years on Facebook. And I think the primary just discussion, once again, is just to talk about like the US and labor, like just
Mhm.
in general, kind of like a pretty
Right.
broad topic, but that's what these long form conversations are kind of suited for, is just kind of talk it
Absolutely.
out.
Yep.
So one thing I'll bring up is, do we, I mean, are we, I just need to find some points of agreement first and then kind of maybe move from there. And I think that that's a good way to start is, do we, I have and please, once I'm done here, let me know if you agree or disagree. A business is inherently, like, because of the way that a system is set up, it's in their best interest to try to negotiate as low a wage as possible for their people that work for them.
It- yeah, it would be in their best interest, but that's obviously not where I'm not the perspective that I would ever look for
Sure.
uh, or hope for.
And I can agree with that as well. So we got a couple spots of agreement there. So my perspective, and I think, and I you actually covered the other one I was going to ask. So like moving on here, I think one disagreement that we have potentially, and just let me flesh this out here, is you are pro, and I have to put a specification here, and if we want definitions, that's fine. But I'm pro, or you, excuse me, you are pro private union. Is that correct?
Uh, yeah, I do believe that they would have a role to play in society. Yes.
Okay. And I guess the ultimate thing is in my question there. So, and I'll outline mine, and then we can discuss. That's probably a better way. So, I don't. Just to be clear, I'm not against unions in general.
Hmm.
I'm against specifically private unions, and this is the reason why. Just real quick, and you already know, but this is more for the audience than you. So the reason that I'm not as big on private unions is one, once again, they have a motivation, uh, just like any other person in society, to kind of, be pulling in these union dues, and essentially they're claiming that they're going to be providing a service in which they, in my opinion, can't adequately provide. Like they don't. So my
Hmm.
proposition is that instead of having like private unions that, once again, they're not going to have as much pull as the government, we try to encompass the entire jobs plan into kind of what the government's good at, and that is like enacting rules and regulations and protecting their citizens. So can we have a
No,
discussion on that?
correct me if I'm wrong, though. Do you consider some forms of employment to be wage slavery?
Uh, I wouldn't use that harsh of a word, but I get your point. I think that once again, going back to that thing we talked about, like it's in the best interest of a business to try to downplay or try to devalue the work that you're doing. So in a way, like and this is uncontroversial, they're making hand over fist over what you're making, right?
Right. I, my personal belief is that if someone wants to join a private union, they should have the right to do so.
Oh, and I don't disagree with that at all. I think that, yeah, it's a free country, and if you want to do that, by all means. I just disagree with the effectiveness of private unions.
My biggest worry with this discussion, Jason, make it clear, I'm not against technological advance, as long as there is an immediate replacement for the wages that someone is losing
Sure.
via the technological advance.
Okay. And I think that's a point of agreement. Is I agree with that we have to, like, there's no
It,
scenario moving forward that go ahead.
but here's the thing. Here's the thing, though. They they I worry that too many people go back to school and then they get a degree that they cannot use. So what did they do during that time period? Yes, that they may have expanded their mind and they might feel better about themselves, but we're in a society that's going to value labor, and that's why currently that's why you go back to school, is to make yourself more valuable in the labor market. So let's say your job gets automated.
So like I get what you're saying is like you can't have a path moving forward where people are just losing their jobs and then those companies who are getting like a benefit from society for having a company, they're not really like benefiting the society that's benefiting them, right? So like there would have to be some way that that's compensated.
Yes.
I don't know what the answer is to that. I think that it would be a discussion of many experts, and I think it would need to be a committee, you know, a long talk for a long time. But ultimately, I think we have an agreement there. Like we actually. One thing I will say though is just specifically on the private unions is that for me, my thought here, and please, you know, as needed push back here. This is, you know, all just open thought here. So
Mm-hmm.
my thought is like if we have a scenario like you're talking about where we have um a person that doesn't have a skill that is valued as much by society or whatever, and it gets automated out, or it's something that is more susceptible to automation,
Mm-hmm.
probably a better scenario to use here. um my thoughts are is that even beyond that, there's this scenario where even if they go over and they get, say, another skill, and that for maybe the foreseeable future doesn't get automated, still we're in this scenario where like private unions are still not going to be able to effectively protect their benefits and their wage in quite a few fields. Like you have to have some sort of a bargaining chip. And I'm not saying that, in my opinion, I think that every job, like you're saying, has its own inherent value. But, and I'm not saying this is my opinion, but when you go to the negotiating table, it's inherent that you must have a bargaining chip to bring to the table.
Is the fact that it's automated or outsourced the union's fault, though, or is that just the greed of the or the let's just say choice, just to be fair,
Okay.
of the business person to just do that?
And I can see what you're saying, and that goes back to if it's that case where it's this greed factor that's causing this. I mean, that's really a much larger issue of
Right.
discussion because then you're
So,
talking about the
but
society in general, which I don't want to go down that rabbit hole if you don't want to, but go
well,
ahead.
I was just saying we're attacking both sides for their greed, yet I don't listen. There there comes a point where you can't. It there's a point. The United States and or developed countries cannot always be blamed for the fact that other countries are not fully developed, and thus it isn't really a good idea to get rid of the wealth and the opportunity in one country just to better another nation necessarily. Do you follow me? That really isn't fair to the developed nation when it was really just random that that our that the United States was further developed, or Ireland, or Mexico, or whoever, and that job or skill should be outsourced or automated to another country, just for the cheaper wage. It's not really the uh, the fault of the person in the developed nation.
So in that one, I would say that's a little bit different because you're talking about outsourcing of jobs, which
Right.
that I can agree. I am absolutely against, the outsourcing of jobs. If you have a company that is benefiting once again by the societal contract of everybody else, like we got to pay taxes, and that's like the social contract that we have is we're hoping I don't know how much we get out of it, but we're hoping that we're going to get something back as a citizen. Is like, hey, I'm paying government man. Government man's supposed to give me these social safety nets and services or whatever in exchange for that. And it's the same with a business. They have to get a business license and a license to operate in that society, which has all of these different contingencies and guidelines to ensure that not only are they getting benefits, but they're also giving into that system. So yeah,
Right.
outsourcing your employees to IT is a real bad situation right now because they're essentially all IT is just getting outsourced to India. I mean, it's not even controversial. It's just happening.
But I think that for maybe in the majority of the people that are studying economics right now, I think that's a good thing.
Well, and I can agree with that because from their perspective, they're talking about profitability, and profitability somehow equals out into the stock market, and the stock market seems to be what everybody focuses on whether or not the economy is healthy. And yeah, that's another can of worms there. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case. I'm not so convinced, but the point is like, yeah, I mean, until you change the culture around that, you're going to have a tough time tackling that issue.
Yeah, I don't think opportunity, and the key word there is opportunity, it gets
Yes,
properly shared in those situations.
sure. And I just had a conversation on a different post that I had made on this similar subject of talking about. And have you ever heard of Jordan Peterson?
Yes.
Okay.
I tend to stay away from him based upon what I've read,
Okay.
but I'm sure uh, I've watched a few debates with him. He debated Michael Eric Dyson on
I haven't seen that one.
race equality matters and things like that. I'm familiar with who he is.
So, yeah, I'm not saying that he's like a person that I agree with overall,
Right.
but I do follow him just because it's good to, in my opinion,
Enjoy
just
different perspectives.
exactly. But one thing that I do think he is right on in a particular point where he debated oh, who's that Armenian guy? I can't remember his name. Well, anyway, he debated this other Marxist, philosopher or whatever,
Mhm, mhm.
and he was talking about how it's immoral to have equality of outcome, but what we should be striving for, like you were saying, is equality of opportunity.
Correct.
And I don't think that our system adequately provides equality of opportunity.
And but if we get rid of dog walking jobs, if we get rid of pizza delivery jobs, which can be easily done, we
Hmm.
there the job that I'm at right now can be eliminated in 10 seconds. How is that going to create a more just society?
I mean, the answer in that is like the whole, I suppose the whole point of automating that out also kind of in a way it goes back to greed because somebody's saying, well, I don't want to pay somebody $7 an hour, for 2 hours to walk my dogs.
So,
But I mean, on the other end, I mean, would you say the same thing about carriage whip, manufacturers back when the
to to
automobile was
to
made?
to a certain extent, if someone still wanted to use the technology, I think that it would be nice if it was available.
And what I don't think that if something is automated, you're mandating that you don't do another thing. I think that's just kind of like
It
technological
it
advance.
yes, but it becomes the norm, and then the other option is no longer available.
Right, but uh, I guess the thing that I'm kind of trying to point out there is you're right, it is no longer available. I mean, there's no more money once again in carriage
Well,
whip
it's not only
manufacturing.
just money. It's a matter of choice. People like why make fun of someone for having a flip phone?
Oh, I guess
You know.
I see your point. Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, like the availability of flip phones.
Sure, but should we ever get to that point where we go, let's completely, that's sort of the conundrum we're at.
Sure.
Is society makes fun of you just for living your life the way you choose. You're not necessarily harming anyone. Uh, you're not necessarily being a knuckle dragger. Uh, but we're still making fun of people because they don't know how to use every feature of Skype.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so in this scenario, this is kind of how I see the automating out of jobs. It's sure. There's definitely the argument to be made. Sam Harris goes really in depth into free will, and like technically in society, you don't have what people typically regard as free will because you just inherently don't have every choice you could possibly have. You're limited in many different ways, and I think that's kind of what you're outlining here is like you're further reducing that freedom of choice
Hmm.
by getting rid of certain technologies that kind of fall out of style. And I think this is more of a technology's kind of just fallen out of style. I don't agree with the people that are just like being belligerent and making fun of people that are doing that. But I mean, ultimately, if you look at like your our it's we all own it, our capitalist structure that we are currently trying to survive in. Unfortunately, if you look at the books, there's less, like for example a job that can be done by a robot arm. It's just on the books just far more efficient. Not only is it more efficient, but it's just it's not necessarily a function specifically of profit. It's just saying instead of having 18 guys, and I mean, I can't tell the specific scenario, but a plant around here, I made a system
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
which it took the job of 18 people and it reduced it down to one person that was going to move or operate that system. And
Right. And is there ever going to be a point where we're going to say, "Hey, we don't need to do that. You can make $8 million in a quarter instead of 10."
well, just real quick on that same scenario though, over time, like in yes, I mean everything in a capitalistic society can be somehow tied to profit, like everything, like breathing is somehow we could probably find the whole scenario, death and taxes, but and and profit, that's money, the big problem, but also the thing that works that we know of, right? So like it's not a case of throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we have to inherently kind of understand that there's these motivations that are more than just profit. Like for example, in this system that I'm talking about, over the years, the motivating factor for them to kind of get rid of that is two reasons. One, the area that those parts are in, on average, in the winter even, is in upwards of 100 degrees in that room. And
Hmm.
and to put 18 people in a room moving parts that are 60 to 70 pounds, picking up from the ground, standing up, placing it on a table or whatever. And granted, there's ways that they could have fixed that ergonomically or whatever. But to just say, we're going to take 16 of you away out of this bad situation and only employ two that they're ergonomically
Right.
fine and just pressing a button.
Right. And that maybe I look at that situation and I go, there are more people on the earth than there were yesterday. So sh- should we necessarily not have the 16 people doing it if they want to? And that's again where I thought you were maybe going with the wage slavery. Oh, people shouldn't have to do that. They shouldn't have to do that kind of work anymore.
And there is a certain element of that, I would agree. But at the same time, I'm not saying that we should be mandating that people can't do that. I'm just saying that it's the same scenario as like the carriage whip manufacturer. Like they aren't making any money anymore because there's
Yeah,
not as many
I,
people driving
I
carriages around.
well, I'm not trying to be old fashioned here,
No, that's fine.
but at the same point, I'm saying if it isn't broke, no need to fix it.
But well, I mean, some scenarios, yes, but there
Because
are
we're
also
because
scenarios,
we're
no.
sitting. I don't know what the world's population is right now. What would you guess it
We'll
is?
just
It's
estimate
significant.
7 billion or so. That's my
Yeah.
guess. I don't
So, and
really
I
know.
don't know what it's going to jump to uh,
Um,
in the future decades. But what are we going to do with all these people? And that's deep philosophical question, I guess.
and that is the tougher part of the question that, unfortunately, once we guys start going down that road, all of a sudden people start pointing fingers and calling you Marxist. But
I mean, we're and that they can call me whatever I want. I consider
yeah,
myself a mainstream capitalist. I really
sure.
do. Uh, just because you're for an income tax doesn't mean you're not a capitalist anymore. And unfortunately, we've headed in the direction of, with some people, if you are for an income tax, you're no longer a capitalist. So,
I guess and I see what you're saying there. I guess I haven't thought enough on specifically income tax. That's an issue I just haven't put a lot of time
mhm.
into. But what I was trying to get at with the, people that, it's like the Leonardo DiCaprio meme of pointing at something is like, haha, Marxist. Uh,
Yeah, no, I followed you.
is just that whether, to go over and just point out ideas isn't saying that I'm just wanting to go over and switch to a completely different system. I think that no, um, what's the best word here? No system of government that we've seen so far in its pure form, in my
Mhm.
opinion, is effective. So like
Yeah,
pure
I'm
capitalism is not effective. Pure
right.
socialism is not
Mhm.
effective. So
We're
we go ahead.
we're completely in agreement with there. We should try different things, see what works, see what doesn't. I've always felt that way. So
Sure. So I mean, another point of agreement, I guess. But so, what do you, just based on my positions that we've talked about before, excuse me, what is a position that, or you feel like there is a form of disagreement?
I worry again with the automation that there really isn't a long-term answer for all those people. And I feel that the people who are accelerating that should worry more about the societal impact. And maybe you do. Obviously, I think you do.
I care about that. So my job, um, and obviously non-disclosures, you can't be specific on things, so just to not be specific is to essentially, right now I'm not really doing a job that's taking anybody's job away.
Hmm.
Previously, when I used to work for Lincoln Electric, yes, absolutely. I mean, various plants around the area, Caterpillar, John Deere, we all did jobs for them that very clearly was taking, I
Hmm.
don't know what the number is, but it has to. I mean, once again, it's that scenario of, okay, 18 people used to do this. Now this new system only takes one operator. Where those 18 people go? I think that just in my experience, it's not. Yes, technically, I suppose profit is in the calculation always, no matter what. It's business. Like that's kind of the whole point. But I think more so the reason that they automate things is for two of the biggest reasons that I found. Is one is so that people are in less and less put into situations that are considered to be dangerous, either short term or even long term, or work that um, just doesn't. Once again, it puts a strain on the body. I mean, there's so many different.
But what if they'd prefer to just keep doing that for 30 or 40 years?
I mean, once again, I don't really think there's anything wrong with that, but in the capitalist society, inherently,
Hmm.
are people going to pay for that higher cost, less efficient
But
action?
but but at some point again, I think society should go. hey, we really are creating this poverty by elimin and it's true in urban and rural settings. It's not just a problem in rural settings.
Yeah,
Uh, you know, people act like this is a rural urban divide. I don't think it is. I think it's happening in both situations. So,
I agree. So I guess both of us have the same concern. So let's try to chew into that a little bit. The past couple of weeks, my buddy Jesse and I have made a couple of attempts and at trying to do a stinking podcast, and I've had a number of technical issues. I'm really crossing my fingers and hoping that we don't have problems today, and it's been good so far. But what the point that I'm trying to get at is I've watched a bunch of information from Milton Friedman, which once again, I'm not saying that I agree with every single thing that Milton
oh yeah,
Friedman, but he does bring up from the 1970s and up to the mid 80s. I've watched a number of those programs. I'm sure they were public broadcast or something, but um, he brings up these points that we're talking about now. And the thing that's kind of interesting is back then he was seen as kind of a not I mean he was, yes, a capitalist, and he claimed he was a capitalist, but if you just objectively look at the things he was talking about, he's talking about social policy that kind of leans a little bit socialist.
no, he believed in universal basic income and things like that, and I don't. I guess I've always found that people have a more enjoyable life when they're not than when they're earning the wage. I think that's it. Just their psyche is a little bit better, in my opinion. The research may say otherwise.
I'm not sure. I guess I don't know what the research would be. The thing that I would have to say there is like we have to go, and this is a much bigger problem than then, but we can maybe use it as a somewhat of a comparison. It's not a direct comparison, but we're just talking it out here. So, like, whenever we had the Industrial Revolution, there were clearly people that were masters of their trade that like an assembly line kind of took their job, but that's a different
Mhm.
scenario where you're taking the one specialized job and you're kind of losing out on that to gain a bunch of unspecialized jobs. So different effect here, but
Yeah.
ultimately we're kind of flipping the lid here where now we're saying these not so specialized jobs are easy to be automated out, and these more specialized jobs are more needed because we can't automate those as easily.
Right.
And the point I would try to make is back then those specialized roles still, and maybe this is tougher for the opposite side of the argument, but they got on just fine. I mean, they found some way or niche to survive in that society and be successful. And I'm just saying that other things, because of technology too, we have the internet. What prevents people, if they have universal basic income that's paying their regular bills, they have more financial freedom to pursue entrepreneurial style things that could also benefit society, open up their own businesses in that. And I think that's where that equality of opportunity comes in. Is like, I think that UBI, um, just looking at the issue and hearing what I've heard some experts say, my opinion is leaning towards, I think that at least in the short term for 15 or 20 years would be beneficial. But
Hmm.
that's once again just like the wage issue here of, the minimum wage and trying to get it to 15 and people speculating that it should be 22 or whatever. That's just a band-aid. We're not really fixing the long-term issue there.
I mean, we have a situation right now where people won't even pay for basic infrastructure. So I
Yes.
have a hard time believing that they're going to want to pay taxes for universal basic income, or however what for whatever however it happens to be funded. I don't know what exact funding mechanism we would use. So I wouldn't, it wouldn't necessarily be taxes, but it would be whatever. So
So in that, I think that, and I think that you can use kind of like, I really liked how in the past presidential election, there was more conversation on the Democratic side about like how this is actually going to get paid for. And
Hmm.
like Bernie, in my opinion, was probably one of the best in that regard. Like he said, hey, this plan is going, the way we're going to pay for it is by enacting this plan, it's going to do this, which will make us pay less money in that, you know. And I think this is one of those scenarios where if you are reducing these problems regarding poverty and all of the baggage that comes with that, then you are essentially paying less into other areas, which could then free up that money to be, you know, it's kind of like a
My
good.
my problem with Bernie is that he knows that there's a tax gap of people already not paying the taxes that they owe.
Yes.
Do we agree that there is a tax gap?
Yeah, I do agree. Yep.
And so if people are already dodging said taxes, how do you convince them to close that gap?
I mean, I know that my if there's any libertarian listeners, I don't think they're going to like this, but it's some bootstrap with a gun is how you do it. I mean, you have the IRS, you have these institutions that is backed up by the military and police force, and you have to be a strong arm in that case. I don't see any other way in a capitalist
See,
society.
that's my I have plenty of other disagreements with Bernie, but that's nuance. The main one that I have with him there is I don't know how to get Peter Thiel to pay his taxes. I don't know how to get Michael Bloomberg to pay his taxes.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna lie to people and say I'm gonna promise you X, Y, and Z if I can't deliver on it. We're living in a society right now, Jason, where people are unwilling to wear masks to make sure other people are safe as a public health measure, let alone pay taxes for an airport. Oh my God, you know.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that's definitely a very true sentiment. I just think that a lot of politician and politician involvement kind of made that situation worse. And I mean, granted, it's kind of tough to fix that now. And I personally think just I think I've made this public opinion clear is, dude, Fauci, he really fucked up, man. Like I think he's a smart guy, and I think that he up as of late has been saying a lot of good, useful things. But when he accepted whatever whoever it was, I don't care if it was Trump or if it was the GOP I don't care who it was, but somebody told him to say something that was not true, and then that immediately, like in the culture that we're in, like if somebody has a foothold into trying to break away somebody's public trust, like it's going to be unfortunately a slippery slope there.
Right.
And,
So I I personally believe that most politicians, mainstream politicians, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, want some sort of universal health care coverage, for example. But they don't know how to get people to genuinely pay their taxes, so then they don't want to overpromise.
yeah, and that's, I don't really have any argument per se, I suppose, but just a
But here,
gripe is that
but my
I don't
but my
understand
problem
how
with
they cannot have people pay
but
their
my
taxes.
but my problem with the Bernie people, and I'm making a generalization, and I apologize, but I feel the need to do that because
No, you're fine.
in order to make my point, my problem with the Bernie people is that they go, you don't care about people if you're not going to promise universal health care. I don't promise universal health care because I don't think I can deliver it.
Sure. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at here is, um, there is definitely quite a bit of truth in saying, so like the main argument for higher taxes for the rich is like the prosperous years, the tax rate was like during the war like 90 some percent, and then it went down to like 80 some percent or whatever. I'm not giving specific numbers here, but to complete the thing here,
Did
like they
did
wanted
anyone
to do
did
it
anyone
then.
actually pay that rate though? I mean, I've always seen those numbers during the Eisenhower years.
Yeah.
I don't actually believe anybody ever paid that rate though. I mean,
And
I'm just being honest.
I know that they didn't, and this is why, is because they invested that money into other things so they didn't have to pay money. So like the 90% that they were paying is like over $10 million or something like that on
Hmm.
average. So
Yeah.
back then, I mean, I think it's higher now, but point being is you're right. They probably didn't actually pay into that bracket because they were like, hey, I ain't going to just throw money away to the government. I'm going
Hmm.
to put it into my business. I'm going to do this or that. And um, so, yeah, I mean, I think that if you raise those taxes, it then makes the motivation. They're like, okay, well, if I don't, and this is actually a current world topic, is Biden just made I don't know if he enacted a policy or if he made a committee or what, but there was some talk about him enforcing or giving more money to the IRS to,
Hmm.
enforce these audits on people who are, rich. And once again, they know, they know now that that bootstrap with a gun is going to be kicking their door down and putting them in jail if they don't pay their friggin' taxes,
Well, and here's the thing, though, is that most of the people that I know are not going to pay anywhere close to that. In fact, most of their taxes are written off, and they're given a huge refund because of the EITC right now. But they're freaked out, and they think that the government's going to come knocking on their door and take all their stuff.
Well, I mean, that's a problem of education, and I think that our government doesn't put enough money into educating the populace.
Well, but they would say what we're calling education, they would consider indoctrination. That's I have no
Yeah,
idea how
yeah. I
Donald
mean,
Trump got. I have no idea how Donald Trump got all the Ron Paul people to unite behind him. I have no idea.
well, because wasn't Ron Paul, and correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't follow him closely, but wasn't he kind of libertarian leaning?
Oh yes he is. But
Okay.
Donald Trump is one of the biggest crony capitalists that has
Well,
ever existed.
I would kind of argue that the roots of libertarianism are also crony capitalism. So,
Well, yeah. Well, we could hash that out, but
I mean, for
to me, a guy from Manhattan who sips tea and goes to parties, I don't know how he quite connected with the Ron Paul people. And I don't mean to stereotype, but it's his political skill. It's baffled me to a certain extent.
I mean, you and me both. I don't think that I think it was just kind of a status symbol for him. And when he got in there, of course, he was willing to do a job, but not the one that was defined by the American people. Like,
Yeah, I think he would have been just as willing to run as a Democrat, but I think the Democrats probably would have scrutinized his tax
yeah,
returns a little bit closer.
right. Um, but to get back to the Ron Paul situation, I actually have, and maybe there's some disagreement here, that Republicans and libertarians are kind of cut from the same cloth.
They are, by and large, they are. Yes.
And
Oh, I agree with that.
so, I mean, I don't know that I would necessarily call a traditional Republican, and man, it's kind of hard to think about who exactly an example of that would be. But point being is like a Republican from when I was going to high school, like 2004, 2005. I don't know that I would necessarily call them a crony capitalist, but definitely a lot of the GOP are.
I would say that most of them end up not using the free market. They end up using their connections to develop their business. They're not, it's not really pull you up, racer. It's my dad has a connection to this politician, and he can get me this grant, and here we go.
Sure, sure. I just, from a policy position, I
And
mean,
and believe me, I'm not against the Small Business Administration or Economic Development Group grants or anything like that. But if you're going to preach free market to me like Ron Paul does, then
I mean,
it just doesn't make sense to me. And I think personally, I think Donald Trump is someone who's used a grant and used the levers of government to make himself successful. While Ron Paul, on the other hand, preaches free market philosophy through and through. So that's why I don't quite understand why the people who love Ron Paul when then love Donald, because they haven't done the research, I don't think.
Yeah, and I could definitely see that. I mean, so yeah, that's kind of an I've never heard that. I guess that analysis before. I guess I haven't looked at my polls close enough here, but I'm just trying to kind of think out loud here because like libertarianism is just as far and Sam I like watching Sam Cedar for this specific reason is because he has libertarians call into his show
Hmm.
and they try to explain these various things like in a real world context, and he's pretty good at trying to keep them to a real world context and not kind of talk about like some ideal future or something like that. He's like
Yeah.
in the real world, how is this going to work?
Yeah, and you have the same problem with the left. My brother is a democratic socialist, and I used to debate him, but then I kind of went, I genuinely don't see how this is going to work in the real world, so I just kind of dropped it.
I mean, yeah, and that just depends on. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of once again painting a bit of a broad brush. I mean, I'm sure there exists some arguments in general kind of libertarianism and general democratic socialism and general like
Hmm.
you could say it for all the groups. There's pieces and parts, some more than others, that are just inherently true and are good. But
Yep. Yep.
I think the problem that we often have in politics in the US specifically is that people don't aren't able or I don't know that they're not able, but they're
If
just not willing to look at those pieces and parts. They're almost kind of like treating the political party like a football team.
if if you want the freedom to do any kind of drug that you want, go ahead. But you should have to end up paying some of the expenses for your medical bills after the fact.
Yeah.
That if you want complete freedom, you have to accept the responsibility. That's
Uh, I don't it's not that important, but I don't agree with that specific scenario,
no,
but I
no.
get what
But
your point is.
seriously though, if you're not going to wear a seatbelt, let's say you're not going to wear a seatbelt and you get in
Okay.
an
Yeah.
automobile accident, and then the taxpayer has to pay for the entire thing because you're destitute, but you didn't want to wear your seatbelt. Most of that could have been avoided.
Yes, I can agree with that. The thing that's kind of tough about, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of scenarios in that same kind of argument category that I see what you're saying there, but there's always like all of these nuances that you have to.
Sure.
In that one, I would agree is probably like a pretty pure example, though. Like the seatbelt situation is like, man, I mean, I guess it's well, it's not technically a free country in that regard, right? Because you can get a
Right.
ticket for not wearing a seatbelt, but
Right.
it's for the greater good. Like,
No, yeah, but that's the same thing with the masks. So people don't worry about the greater good now. They worry about what's in it for me. Am I going to be able to live in their definition freedom? In their
yeah.
definition free.
And this whole situation with like these quote unquote social freedoms that are being violated, and it's 1980 freaking
For him.
yeah. It's like, come on, guys, you're pushing this to an extreme level. Like, I imagine going back to 1940s Britain with Americans instead of the Brits when there was bombing raids every night on London, and it was asked as a social good, everybody please shut your lights off in your houses past once it's dusk, shut your lights off so they don't know a target.
Hmm.
Americans would never do that. We would be bombed to oblivion because
Yeah,
people are like, it's my house. I pay the electric bill, and you're not going to tell me. You know, it's just like, come on, guys.
and yeah, I mean all these people who claim to support the military and all these different things that the military does, yet they're so against collective action. What do you
Yeah,
think the military is? It's a collective idea of going out and completing a mission.
I think that people on that point, they very often say that they support the military, And they very often get triggered by all of these. Like, for example, I'm a veteran, and as you know, and I'm just using that for this example. If I see somebody outside burning an American flag, I'm just like, okay.
Hmm.
I mean, it's whatever for me. I mean, that's your right. I went to war, 2 tours of Iraq, and once again, I have the social maturity to say he's not violating any laws. There shouldn't
Hmm.
be any laws against that because it's freedom of expression, and I can't possibly bring myself to be offended by that. Like, it
Hmm.
is literally impossible for me to just decide to get worked up about
Hmm.
somebody doing X, Y, and Z. And it's very often the same scenario at the military. All those people that got pissed off about Biden putting those troops in some parking garage or whatever. Like, they're all like, well, yeah, but if you say otherwise, then you don't truly support the military. And it's like, look, obviously, whoever's making that comment has not served in the military. Because, I mean, if I got told that I could go sit in a nice parking garage instead of be out in the middle of the middle of bumfuck nowhere in a tent and, no air conditioning or whatever, hey, that's not like the point of the military. We don't like our military members, they are serving like a purpose. And if we just didn't have places for them to go, that's the number one people that we would expect to adapt and overcome these situations that are presented to them. Uh,
Yeah.
Obviously, they don't really, in that regard, support the military. They just want to conveniently attack what is politically relevant at the time
Hmm.
in defense of something that I don't really truthfully think they have done a lot of effort in actually supporting.
No.
But we are getting around the 50-minute mark, so let's do kind of like a back and forth here. So, like, you tell me, I guess, something of a position that you, and maybe that's a little bit tougher. Maybe I'll just come up with a few questions here to kind of like end us out. So, the first question I guess I would have is, are you opposed to government organized unions?
No, I think people should have the right to join one. Yeah, absolutely. Um, do I think the problem that I would have with it is we in many communities we're struggling to come up with the revenue to make sure those employees are properly paid. So thus, in my opinion, the business community needs to be able to say, "Hey, we're no longer going to get rid of these companies, so we can actually have the revenue to pay the public employees." You follow me?
Yeah,
If we don't have the revenue, it gets harder and harder to pay these public employees. That's the issue.
sure. Okay. Yeah, I see the point there. Yeah, I mean, from the business standpoint, I mean, maybe that's where the house of cards comes tumbling down because, like,
Well,
ultimately,
yeah, I mean, you've got all these business people all over the country and all over the world saying, "I'm a patriotic person," yet I'm not willing to pay my taxes. So,
well, yeah, and once again, I would argue. So their argument is, well, I'm just benefiting from loopholes in the system that exist, and anybody else would do the same thing for their taxes, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess I see that point, but they also, once again, like, ultimately, uh, I do think that a lot of those people also advocate to keep those loopholes in there
hmm,
with their money that they're gaining because of those loopholes. So it's like a never-ending, exponential
cycle.
scenario here where
Hmm.
it just flies off the rails after a while. And I think
Yeah,
we're getting close to that point where, like, we're speeding pretty fast, and it's the train cars bouncing left and right on the rails, and for one of these days people are going to get fed up with it.
I don't know because I think we get more and more comfortable with the way things are, and we don't really. I don't know. I just don't know what's going to happen. But I don't like the direction.
I don't either, and that's I guess the main reason that I like to have these long form conversations is not necessarily to say, "Hey, everybody, I've got the answer. Here it is," and try to convince somebody of an answer. It's just really kind of bouncing ideas back and forth, and working through disagreements.
And I guess part of my problem with some scientists that I've run into is they kind of demean people who say, I want to keep this job in this community, though. I kind of, you see what I'm saying? They're kind of like, they kind of say the outsourcing is going to happen, so you might as well just get used to it and not. They can be kind of demeaning and snarky about it.
I can see that, and that's so. I could probably be accused of having that position from time to time. I can be introspective and admit that, and I think that the point, admittedly, hey, there's probably a better way to convey that point, so I can take that constructive criticism. But once again, going back to kind of like the horsewhip, manufacturing scenario,
Mm-hmm.
is that ultimately for me, I can't speak for other people. I mean, but I'm saying for me personally, that is my stance of, like I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Starship Troopers, but they have
Yeah.
this really great scenario at the start of that movie where they're talking about the difference between just I don't remember the first word that they use, but essentially somebody that just is a freeloader on society versus somebody that's a quote unquote citizen.
Mm-hmm.
And my goal is kind of use that similar definition and say, like, a person in our society who's actually working to be a citizen is also not only just trying to look out for themselves, but they're also trying to look out for the others around them as kind of like a social good,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
the reason that I, come out with these harsh realities or whatever, and it is in some regards, like it is just absolutely trying to be as truthful as possible. If you're a truck driver right now, like, please, I understand, like, yes, it could be argued that, hey, the truck driving companies are just being greedy bastards, but ultimately, who's going to suffer? It's going to be the truck driver. And I don't want the truck drivers to suffer, but I also think that, to continue to stay in that job is kind of still enacting suffering on yourself. Like, I just.
See, and that may be our main disagreement, and we just, there's, but
Sure. I just don't. It comes from a position of just looking at what the trend is and then being as compassionate as you can be, but you also have to kind of push people to say, hey, I mean, a lot of people I've seen over the years just kind of hope for the best and don't do things to kind of like be the
prepare.
right to prepare themselves. Like, I'm not asking that everybody needs to be a doomsday prepper or something, but like there has to be like a happy medium, and I don't know how to achieve that. Like, how do you tell truck drivers specifically, and I'm just using that as an example, hey, there's really no, like, to enact a social policy that prohibits the automation of truck driving wouldn't be right, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. Like, that isn't a moral path forward. But also, it's not a moral path forward to just say, haha, fuckers, you suck, and they have no job, like, that's not also a path forward and is wrong. So the tough problem here that we have, and once again, I don't know that we can today, it's not likely to happen because it's a tough question. How do we meet this happy medium of, we know that it's going this way, but we also need to kind of protect our fellow citizen, the truck driver?
I think we've always just closed our eyes and after a while pretended like everything was okay.
I mean, so what do you think of, like, for example, there was a scenario a few years back, I think it, and correct me if I'm wrong, you might actually know this, wasn't there like a bunch of programs in like Kentucky and like Tennessee and coal mines when they were closing down a bunch of coal mines because the Obama administration,
Mm-hmm.
there was like of course, a lot of those people, because of the EPA specifically, which is something that Trump ran on and got a lot of those votes, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
they lost their jobs. So then they had government programs, and I think it's kind of, it sucks. Like their heart was in the right place, but they just
Hmm.
badly read the room. They read the room so wrong. Is they said, "Hey, we're going to give grants just for specifically IT and programming jobs,
Hmm.
so that you can get out of this situation." So
Hmm.
what I would like to ask you is, beyond that, like if we were to say, "Hey, government, you've really screwed up this situation. What we really need is you to say your profession of choice. We will choose as a government and as a society in trying to help our fellow man, give you funding to kind of overcome this hardship that society is creating."
Yeah, I wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't be opposed to that by any means. Again, I just put it on the business person to say, I'm gonna be, I'm gonna look out for society, and I'm not gonna be as greedy as I usually am in many cases, and I'm going to keep this job even if it's only for 5 or 10 years longer. Um, I know that's not looking at the long term issue, but so there's only so much we can do in this world, Jason.
Yeah.
You know, I. I don't mean to be selfish, but I can't really think of decades down the road. Most people I know live paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, the hope would be to try to ease that financial hardship, but without having these, and this is probably a good spot to close here. I'll still, if you want to give some final remarks here, but just real quick, that's what's important about, in my opinion, these long form conversations is, sure, we may not have solved a single issue in this conversation, and I think that it's going to take a lot of public interest in this, and the only way you could really have that is to publicly talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's really my hope here, is like, is I mean, you have brought up some really good points, and really I think we really, in my opinion, agree more than we disagree. I think that there's a disagreement as far as like, should jobs be automated or should they not be? And that's like a case by case basis, so that's almost an impossible argument to have. But
Yeah.
what would be your kind of final thoughts on the discussion here?
Like you said, I would just like people to pay more attention to it, to be more aware of their community, to be more aware of what's going on, and to say, if a company does leave, we have to find replacements almost immediately if possible, because people are going to struggle. They're going to turn to drugs. There's going to be a lot of bad societal impact. People can't. Uh, Schools are not going to be properly funded because of the outsourcing and the automation and all these different situations. So I would beg people to pay more attention, and to be more aware of what's going on, and not necessarily just paying attention to their own little world.
Sure. And as a point of agreement, I absolutely think that it's very powerful to step past this kind of box that people very often get themselves in, where they're just kind of taking the talking heads' opinions for full worth there, instead of like listening and maybe doing even basic, like we're not, the scenario isn't like everybody needs to be hacker man and just be constantly just researching stuff. Like
Hmm.
that's not the scenario, but the
It's
scenario
not
would
realistic.
be, right, it's not, and you can't be an expert on everything. It's just
Hmm.
impossible. But the question I would or the urge that I would have in mirroring what you're saying is, you really need to, in today's society, there has to be this adaptation for doing research beyond what two things: what the media is specifically saying and what politicians are saying, because
Hmm.
there's a vested interest in misinformation. And
Yeah.
once we identify that problem, then once again, to be a citizen versus somebody that's just somebody that exists in the same society, you have to
Yeah.
do that due diligence, to do that
And just
research.
because and just because 40 or 50 people pass it around on Facebook or Twitter
Yep,
doesn't make it true either. So,
sure. But it's been a fun talk. I really did enjoy it, and my hope is Would you be interested sometime? And you don't have to answer now if you don't want to, but I would like to get like a group discussion going about just general subjects. We talked about labor mostly here, but I enjoy your company and your conversation, and I'd love to have you on for a group discussion sometime.
Absolutely. I'd enjoy that very much.
Awesome. Well, Tyler, it's been great. I'm going to switch to the audience here real quick. So, audience, if this is content that you like, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you watch me on Facebook, my page, The Smoogley, you can like that page for updates on the channel. And as always, thanks for listening. Bye.